And joining me are poet and critic Tom Paulin, academic and writer Sarah Churchill, and journalist and MP Michael Gove. In the Superhero Hall of Fame, Marvel Comics' Iron Man, created by Stan Lee in 1963, was an anti-communist champion in a story set against the backdrop of the Vietnam War. Now Iron Man has followed Batman, the X-Men, the Hulk and Spider-Man onto the big screen. In the story, Iron Man is engineered by the brilliant Playboy arms manufacturer Tony Stark, originally inspired by Howard Hughes and played in the movie by Robert Downey Jr. Director Jon Favreau has updated the action to Afghanistan and the war on terror, where Tony Stark is injured by one of his own weapons and captured by a bunch of mercenaries. Sarah, as I was saying, he's the latest to join the parade of superheroes. But is he super enough?
Well, for me, he is. I mean, for me, he always will be. I found that it's an essentially silly film. We knew it would be an essentially silly film. But for me, Robert Downey Jr.'s intelligence and charisma and charm is so powerful that it helps to elevate what is essentially, it is a comic book. It's meant to be a comic book. I don't think that the script has the depth of some of the other recent comic book adaptations, such as the new Batman, the newly invigorated Batman franchise with Christian Bale, which I think has more intelligent and darker scripts than this is. And I think it has, it has a very problematic relationship to its central story about weaponry, because it's kind of, the moral implications of it are very, very dubious. But for me, Robert Downey Jr. just makes it a film well worth seeing.
Michael?
I agree Robert Downey Jr. is eminently watchable, but I think there was a great missed opportunity here. Because he could have been a rogue who was at the same time heroic, but unfortunately he goes through a sort of epiphany. He rejects his arms-dealing past, and therever after, his role towards arms, towards the technology, which makes this film thrilling, is ambiguous, but not in a good way. And I think it would have been a better film if Robert Downey Jr. had remained properly roguish throughout, and if we hadn't had him becoming, as it were, a sort of a preacher halfway through for pacifism, because one of the best things about this film is the almost unembarrassed way at certain points in which it celebrates warpower. There are one or two rather embarrassing incidents where you've got some rather crude stereotyping of people in the Hindu Kush and Pathan warriors and all the rest of it. But the most magnificent section of this film is where you see two American fighters and the Robert Downey Jr. character in his Iron Man guise doing the most amazing acrobatic things, where you actually get a sort of horrific aesthetic out of seeing these weapons doing their stuff.
And we're going to see that in a moment. Just sticking just briefly with the Robert Downey character, I mean, it wasn't a natural casting for a superhero. I mean, he reprised the role he played in Zodiac, kind of witty, camp.
Yeah, well, I thought he played the role of a sort of late agonised liberal very well, and that, of course, it tapped into what's deep in the film, which is an anxiety and guilt about Iraq and Afghanistan, and the fact that they used to support the Americans, the Taliban, and Saddam Hussein. And it plays with that, interestingly, because otherwise it's nonsense. It's set, there is one of the arms manufacturers sending arms.
But do you really need a moral heart at the comic?
I think I think it is there, isn't it?
Well, it certainly is, but I think that's what worries me about it, is that where it could have actually been dark and complex. There's actually a scene where technology makes the moral decision for him. It isolates the bad guys and isolates the good guys and lets him decide what he needs to decide. And that for me, it's the other way around, which is that Robert Downey Jr. is such a dark actor. He could have brought so much more edge to this and so much more complexity if they'd let him go deeper. So yes, there has to be some sense of morality, but there doesn't have to be this simplistic morality.
It depends a lot on this backstory, doesn't it? This building up of the backstory about his father being the World War II hero who set the atomic bomb and so forth.
But I think the sort of guilt and anxiety in it is interesting, but it does go off, obviously, when he then gets doubtful, because there are all sorts of things that you can't explain what's happening to the business, and he giving up making arms.
And it just becomes compensatory, doesn't it? Just kind of compensatory muscle flexing.
The prerequisite, of course, for these superhero movies is the special effects. And you were talking about this scene, and basically what happens in this scene, and we're just going to see it now, is that his friend Terrence Howard, who's in the US military as head of kind of weapons development, is speaking to him, not knowing, in fact, that he is actually in the air being attacked by the US military.
Yeah, speaking of funny, we've got a weapons depot that was just blown up a few clicks from where you were being held captive.
Well, that's a hot spot. Sounds like Someone stepped in and did your job for you.
Why do you sound out of breath, Tony?
I'm not. I was just jogging in the
I
canyon.
thought you were driving.
Right, I was driving to the canyon where I'm going to jog.
You sure you don't have any tech in that area I should know about?
Nope. Bogey spotted.
Whiplash, come in hot.
Okay, good, because I'm staring at one right now and it's about to be blown to Kingdom Come.
That's my exit.
Michael.
Yes, no, that was just the beginning of an even more magnificent sequence which follows, which I would recommend anyone goes to see. Some people listening to Tom bringing in Iraq and Afghanistan will say, oh, no, what's it got to do with that? But actually, I think Tom does have a point. Because in a way, the two central characters who are linked to the arms firm, the Jeff Bridges character, Obadiah, and Robert Downey Jr., could stand, and I hope this won't have me laughed out of court, could stand as symbols of two different types of conservative American politician. Because Obadiah is the realist, and he doesn't care what happens as long as America makes money. He's amoral, but clear. Whereas Robert Downey Jr...
So he's like an arms dealer, real arms dealer.
Exactly. He's the Kissingerian figure. Whereas Robert Downey Jr. is the tortured idealist who discovers, that America's forces have been used for bad and then attempts to use them for good. And in that respect, he could be the blundering Bush or he could be the Wilsonian.
Except that what he discovers is that if you develop a better weapon, make sure that only good guys use it.
Yes.
I mean, the actual... No, but I mean, that's what I'm saying.
It's just like another chapter.
And it's explicitly about Afghanistan. I mean, part of it is set in Afghanistan.
Yes.
So, I mean, that's hardly a stretch.
It's bound to have Iraq as well.
Of course.
I mean,
but they never use the word Taliban. They never
much
mention...
more complicated as an issue, I think.
Absolutely.
Whereas the Vietnam is much more explicit.
Exactly. I mean,
they
they never mention the Taliban. They never mention Iraq. And I think you're exactly right that silence is an indication of how anxious they are about that it's about Afghanistan, but not really about Afghanistan.
Well, go and see for yourself if it's really about Afghanistan or not really about Afghanistan. Iron Man Certificate 12A is in cinemas now.